Okay, well, where did network science start? Well, it's kind of important to look back at how it happened. And the guy who did it was named Leonard Euler. And Euler was this, if not the greatest mathematician to ever live, probably, certainly in the top three or four. So, I mean, he lived in the 1700s. And during his lifetime, he wrote, I think it was approximately 500 papers and books uh, to, and he just became the father of just a lot of things in math. And so what happened was Euler happened to live close by to a town called Königsberg, and Königsberg, it was at that time in Germany, and now it's in Russia. But anyway, they had seven bridges, and these seven bridges crossed over within the city, and there was a game created around this. They were trying to figure out if it was possible to cross all seven bridges without having to go back over one of the other ones first. In other words, not to retrace your steps. And this became sort of a fad in the city itself, and people tried and tried. They tried everything they could, but nobody could seem to prove, no one was able to do it, but no one was able to prove that you couldn't do it. And so it became something of interest. Now, if you're somebody like Euler, who's that smart, and I mean, in all kinds of fields, he was amazing. I mean, he was in astronomy, he was in navigation. I mean, the guy is a genius. Okay, and so a friend presented it to him, and I want to just quote you what he said. Why would he be messing with something that silly? And anyway, he talks. He says this question is so banal, but seems to me worthy of attention in that neither geometry, algebra, nor even the art of counting was sufficient to solve it. So he was interested in why it wasn't being solved. And I don't want to get into the whole thing of why it wasn't solved, but what he was able to prove, and was that he created a thing called vertices, and he called them edges. Now, vertices now are basically called nodes, and edges are now called links. Although some people still call them edges, but most places it's called links. And so what he was able to show mathematically that it was impossible, absolutely impossible, to cross each of these seven bridges uh, without going back over one. And he went through his whole mathematical formula. It doesn't really matter the formula. What really matters is that he created in what he called dealing with something as trivial as this, or he called it banal. Basically, he created a whole new science dealing with nodes and dealing basically with links. And this is how network science started. This was in 19, was it 17, well, I think it was 1775 was when he did this. And so all of a sudden, people started to think of a whole new thing called networking science, networks, the science of networks. Uh, what's interesting is it's now both a noun and a verb, but as we may have mentioned earlier, is that most verbs start out as a noun. And so when he called it networks back in 1775, it didn't become a verb until the 1980s. So it was 235 years later that basically it went from being a noun to a verb. And a verb, of course, is a much more fluid moving. A verb is in motion, whereas a noun is stationary. And it wasn't until it got to be a verb that it really became a science. And so that's the guy. And so the father of all network science is a guy named Euler, and he was able to create and coin the whole thing. And so if you're studying network science, you got to know the guy who created it, and that was Euler. I learned from Bucky a long time ago that the bigger the picture, the more accurate your prediction. There's nothing in a caterpillar, if you just study a caterpillar, will ever tell you about scenario butterfly. So my entire life, I am working as much as I can to be a comprehensivist. That is interested in everything, so I can make better choices, better decisions, and have a better perspective. What can I do for you?